Why is it that you're not bad with people at all? You're not socially awkward. You're not incapable of connection. In many situations, you even appear easygoing, thoughtful, dependable. And yet, at some point, you realize there's no longer anyone you can speak to completely honestly, without choosing your words carefully, without editing yourself first. It's not that you've never met people. It's not that you've never been liked, needed, or taken seriously. You've been part of conversations, gatherings, even relationships, but somewhere along the way, you began drifting to the edge. You watched others grow closer, their bonds deepening, stabilizing, becoming something solid, and you stayed just one step behind. Life happened right in front of you, but you never fully stepped inside it. Why is it that when others talk about friendship, intimacy, or companionship, you understand exactly what they mean? You can describe how closeness forms, how reliance develops, and where relationships often begin to strain or fall apart. You see it clearly. You hear it clearly. Yet, when these things come to your life, you grow more cautious, more restrained, more hesitant to move forward. Not because you're indifferent, not because you don't need connection, but because long before anything truly begins, your body and your mind have already learned one quiet rule: getting close can hurt. And why is it that as the people around you slowly disappear, you begin to turn the question inward? Am I too sensitive? Am I too difficult? Do I think too much? And that's why no relationship ever stays? You tell yourself, maybe I just don't need friends. Being alone is fine. But if that were truly enough, why does the silence ache late at night? If these questions feel familiar, today's conversation isn't about how to make friends faster, and it's not about becoming more outgoing, more proactive, or more socially skilled. We're looking at something deeper, something that's rarely understood with care. Why do some people, after repeated disappointments, slowly become someone with no friends? And behind that transformation, is it really personality? Or is it the brain, after being hurt for too long, quietly learning a form of self-protection you may not even realize you're using? You weren't born afraid of closeness. In fact, many people who end up without close friends were once deeply invested in relationships. You were never someone who skimmed the surface. You observed carefully, you felt deeply, you paid attention to tone, pauses, subtle shifts in emotion. You were willing to go further, to connect on a more meaningful level. The problem was never that you didn't want intimacy. The problem is that intimacy hurt you. In psychology, there's a concept known as emotional association memory. When certain emotional experiences repeat themselves, the brain begins to automatically link a particular state, like closeness, with a sense of threat. Maybe there were moments like this. You finally let your guard down. You shared something that truly mattered to you, and the other person didn't catch it. Your honesty was brushed aside. Your vulnerability was misunderstood, or in some cases quietly used against you. These moments don't need to be dramatic to leave a mark. They just need to be real. Over time, your brain learned a simple conclusion: closeness carries risk. From there, a tension formed between your desire to be understood and your instinct to stay safe. You still long for connection, but just before things deepen, you pull back, almost automatically. This isn't coldness, and it isn't social failure. It's a nervous system that remembers pain and adapts accordingly. When intimacy once led to harm, distance begins to feel like protection. And without you ever deciding it consciously, staying guarded becomes the safer choice. Almost no one wakes up one day and decides, I don't want friends anymore. For most people, it happens slowly, so slowly that it's barely noticeable while it's happening. A personal story that receives no response, an expectation that quietly goes unmet, a moment of sincerity that's treated as insignificant. Each moment seems small on its own. None of them feel worth confronting, but together they accumulate. Psychology refers to this as micro-relational trauma, not trauma caused by dramatic conflict, but by repeated emotional letdowns that gradually weaken your sense of trust. You begin to notice a pattern. You invest a little more than others do. You care a little more deeply. You show up with more sincerity than what comes back to you. So you start adjusting. You speak less. You expect less. You hold your truth a little closer to your chest, not because you've become colder, but because you're trying to protect yourself from disappointment. Over time, your relationship strategy shifts. You stop investing. You start testing. You rely on logic to keep yourself safe, telling yourself, don't take it too seriously. Don't expect too much. Distance is safer. Research shows that when emotional effort consistently outweighs emotional return, the brain will begin to reduce social motivation on its own, not because you don't want connection, but because your nervous system has learned that expectation often leads to pain. So you stop reaching out, you stop explaining, you stop offering your hand first. On the surface, you may look independent, self-sufficient, unbothered, but internally, you're quietly building a boundary, not to reject the world, but to keep yourself from being worn down by countless unnamed disappointments. Loneliness is difficult not simply because it feels bad. From a psychological and neurological perspective, prolonged social isolation is processed by the brain as a genuine threat. When someone lacks stable, reliable social connection for long periods, the regions of the brain involved in processing physical pain, particularly those associated with rejection and danger, become repeatedly activated. In other words, being ignored, excluded, or unseen doesn't stay confined to emotion. It registers in the nervous system in ways that closely resemble physical pain. This is why loneliness is often accompanied by changes that seem unrelated at first. Lighter sleep, frequent waking, fluctuating heart rate, a mind that constantly scans for danger, even when nothing is actually wrong. From an evolutionary perspective, this response makes sense. For most of human history, long-term separation from the group meant a serious threat to survival. The brain's alarm system evolved to signal, you're losing connection, you need to return to the group. The problem arises when this alarm remains active without ever being resolved. When isolation continues without meaningful reconnection, the brain never receives the signal to stand down. As a result, you may notice something confusing. You don't feel at ease when you're alone. You feel even more tense around people, and despite nothing outwardly happening, your body stays subtly on guard. This isn't overthinking, it isn't weakness. It's your nervous system communicating something fundamental. Connection matters deeply, and when it's missing for too long, your brain treats that absence as something that truly hurts. When loneliness lasts long enough, the brain doesn't just stay on alert. It begins to change your behavior. To avoid being hurt again, you become more cautious. You express less. You expect less. You pull back just before closeness can fully form. From the inside, this feels reasonable, even intelligent, a form of self-protection. But psychologically, something else is happening. When you become quieter, more guarded, and emotionally restrained, the signal others receive is rarely, I'm protecting myself. More often they read, This person doesn't really want to be close, so they step back. And that small step back confirms the belief you already carry. See, no one actually wants to come closer. This is how the loop tightens. No one is intentionally rejecting you, and you're not intentionally rejecting anyone. It's a mutual misreading, one driven by fear on both sides. After repeated relational pain, the brain raises its internal risk threshold. It would rather miss a possible connection than endure another rejection. Over time, you may notice a painful contradiction. You long to be understood, yet feel unsafe being fully seen. You want closeness, but instinctively retreat from the moments that could lead there. Loneliness stops being just a lack of friends. It becomes a belief system, one that keeps reinforcing itself. The more cautious you are, the fewer connections form. The fewer connections form, the more necessary caution seems. And none of this means you are incapable of connection. It means your brain is using past wounds to predict future danger, even when that danger may no longer be there. When caution becomes a long-term strategy, another subtle shift begins to take place. You start to split into two versions of yourself. One is the version the world sees: composed, functional, reasonable. You work, you show up, you handle social situations without causing disruption. You don't ask for much, you don't reveal too much. The other version exists only inside you. This version is more sensitive, more aware of what's missing, more conscious of the quiet ache beneath the surface. This isn't deliberate deception, it's adaptation. When your authentic self repeatedly fails to receive response or care, your nervous system learns a simple rule: hide what needs connection, present what can cope, so you become very good at being okay, even when there's no one to talk to, even when your inner world feels hollow, even when something important goes unshared. But there is a cost. Your emotions begin circulating only inside you, without feedback, without reflection, without relief. You may find yourself replaying conversations, imagining dialogues that never happened, carrying entire relationships inside your own head. This state isn't dramatic. It isn't collapse. It's suspension. You're not fully engaged with life, but you haven't stepped away either. You're watching yourself exist from a slight distance, and this is why many deeply lonely people appear completely fine. They function, they smile, they manage, yet internally they feel strangely unreal, as if their life is happening without being fully lived. This quiet fragmentation is not a flaw in your personality. It's what happens when the part of you that needs connection has learned it's safer to stay hidden. Real change rarely begins with suddenly meeting the right person. It usually begins somewhere quieter, with how you allow yourself to be real. When you've spent a long time suppressing needs, managing emotions, and presenting only the version of yourself that can cope, relearning connection does not mean becoming outgoing or expressive overnight. It means practicing honesty at a scale that feels safe. The first step isn't moving toward others, it's allowing yourself to admit, internally, that you do need connection, not as a weakness, not as a flaw, but as something fundamentally human. From there, reconnection happens gradually, not by telling your entire story, not by trusting everyone, but by letting small pieces of truth surface. It might look like this. When someone asks how you're doing, you pause and don't immediately say, "I'm fine." Or in conversation, you allow a moment of silence instead of rushing to smooth everything over. These moments may seem insignificant, but to your nervous system they send a powerful new signal. Expression does not automatically lead to danger. Safety can exist alongside honesty, and this is how the brain relearns connection, not through insight alone, but through repeated, lived experience. What matters isn't how many people you connect with. What matters is whether you allow your full self, not just the manageable version, to exist within relationships again. Because you can only be truly seen when you stop hiding. And real connection doesn't happen in crowds. It happens in the moment you no longer disappear from yourself. If you've stayed with this story until now, you may be realizing something quietly important. You were never broken. You were never bad at relationships. You simply learned very early how to survive in spaces where your needs went unanswered. You learned to lower expectations, to contain sensitivity, to shape yourself into something that wouldn't inconvenience others. You became composed, controlled, invisible. But being unseen is not the same as being unworthy of being seen. Many people feel lonely not because they don't want connection, but because they're only allowed to exist in a version of themselves that appears already resolved. When the world only interacts with your stability and never touches your truth, it's natural to wonder if you're meant to be alone. But the truth is simpler and kinder. The relationships meant for you will never require you to erase yourself first. You don't need to become louder, more social, or easier to like. You only need to remember that the version of you before the withdrawal, before the self-protection, before the quiet retreat, was already whole. One day you may meet someone who doesn't rush you to explain but chooses to stay, and in that moment you'll understand. You were never forgotten by the world. You were waiting for someone who could truly see you. This is happy psychology. May understanding bring healing, and may healing help you grow.